Hey, this is Dustin with Magnus Pest Management in Waco, Texas, and you're listening to the Pest Geek Podcast with Frank Hernandez, the world's #1 pest control training podcast.
This edition of the Pest Geek Podcast is brought to you by Pest Routes. Pest Routes, supercharge your company with Pest Routes, the #1 pest control software to help you dominate your goals. Visit them at pestroutes.com and get your free demo.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek Podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek Podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your pest geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube, we're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And now for today's topic. Okay, so we're discussing tramp ants. And what is so important about tramp ants? The fact that these guys are the 7 most common invaders of homes in the U.S. And they have 6 characteristics that are primary to understanding why they're so difficult to control and why it is that most people fail at it. So let's take a look at this. Why are they called tramp ants? Well, tramp ants are ants that go on ships and cargoes and trucks, and they move into continents by basically hitchhiking. So because they invade properties and they invade structures so easily, they easily hitchhike on board anything they can find. And then they come into our country and they're known as an exotic invasive. Now, what happens is that most people don't understand insect biology. They don't understand that these insects all have different behaviors, but they got 6 common characteristics. And we're going to start looking at each ant, the most common ones that we find in homes, so that you can understand if you have one of these ants, you're better be prepared for a different type of tactic. The first one is the Argentine ant. Now, this ant is one of the most difficult. I mean, these are the 7 most difficult ants to control in the world. They tend to like more of a Mediterranean climate. So you're going to find these very, very, very in abundance in places like California. So that's going to be a big issue. If you're in California and you're dealing with these ants, you got to be prepared that your traditional quarterly service might not be adequate to control these types of species. Now we got big-headed ant. Now over here, if you look on the side, you see there's a big-headed ant. Most people don't see this one. They think they got like fire ants or something that they're going to get bitten, because this ant right here is a minor worker. And these are the abundant ones, these little tiny ones. These guys are major workers. Now, major workers are not always out. And what happens is when you start being effective at collapsing this entire colony, what happens is that these little guys go away. You start finding them dead everywhere. And then you start seeing these big-headed ones more and more. That's how you know the colony's collapsing, because you start seeing the major workers having to come out and work for a living. So go figure, right? Now, the crazy ant. Well, the crazy ant is known for being crazy because of its sporadic movement. What it does is it walks all over the place really fast. It's a really quick ant, very sporadic. Very rarely will you see trails. And it's also known as the longhorn crazy ant because of its, look over here at my cursor, this type of antenna. That's one of the ways to identify it, that you have also a crazy ant. Most people confuse it with the white-footed ant because they're black. They tend to look black. But the white-footed ant is a more robust ant. It's a very slow-moving ant. It tends to move up and down. It doesn't move across trails on the ground. You're usually going to see it moving up a wall or across a soffit or a fascia board, because you have them in the attic and they love to go up. They love to go up palm trees, up trees. Everywhere there's trees, they're going to want to go there. The crazy ant doesn't do that. It pretty much goes everywhere crazy. and it's a very difficult ant to control. All right, so we've got the ghost ant now, and this is a little tiny sucker that's probably the smallest of them all. Now, as a characteristic, most tramp ants are small and tiny. And most people have a hard time seeing them. They're not like carpenter ants that are huge, or sometimes some large fire ants. These are very tiny. As a matter of fact, this one's called the ghost ant because it looks like its little body is floating all over the place, and you never see their legs. Most people think they got spiders. I've been called, I got these bunch of spiders. No, you don't have spiders. You have actually ghost ants. All right, so that is a close relative also to the odorous house ant. Up in the north, and it's a northernmore ant. Down here in the south and in places where it's very humid, they love subtropical and tropical environments like the Caribbean, South Florida, even parts of South America like Brazil. It's a huge problem because they tend to grow in areas where it's very moist, about 80 inches of rain per year, high humidity in the 90s. They love that environment. Temperature stays in the 70s all year round. They can breed all year round. There's no overwintering of pests in the Caribbean and here in South Florida. Now, here they have the odorous house ant. Now, this odorous house ant is you see it with wings. Now, most of these ants do produce wings, but they do not have nuptial flights. They actually mate in the nest. They're not like termites that do these flights once a year. Depending on which termite you have in your area, you're going to have different termite swarms, and they're mating. That's what they're reproducing at the time of year. Now, these ants will produce wings once these male reproductive and the female, they drop their wings, and they actually use them as food to feed the larvae because they can tear those wings apart, and it has protein in them. And the larvae will feed on that protein. And most people don't know this. So these guys can live virtually anywhere because they have their own food source. And here you have a pharaoh ant, which is a nightmare of an ant for most people. That professionals, they get a pharaoh ant, and it's a nightmare. But this ant, you see, it has wings also. And this is one of those ants that most of them will create the wing. They're called alates. And alates are winged ants, and they can reproduce. The funny part is they can reproduce without alates and with alates. So that's the issue with them, is they can reproduce pretty much anywhere. That's why they're so difficult to control. Now we come to the white-footed ant. And the white-footed ant is right now a nightmare because here's why it's called white-footed ant. You see the little legs? You can't see this from regular view, but if you look under a microscope right there, you can see that little leg, and there is the whitefoot. And this ant is one of those ants that makes super colonies. Hundreds of thousands of ants in a colony. And they will make a nest outside. They will make a nest inside. They tend to make it up in the attic. So if you get it, you pretty much have to bait them out of the attic to try to find and where they're at. Because you're not going to be able to treat that entire attic, crawl in there and find it in a corner of an attic where it's not accessible. And you don't need to treat the whole attic to solve this problem. But that is a common an ant here in South Florida, and it is a nightmare. All right, so let's talk about the 6 traits. Here are the 6 traits. They're unicolonial, they're polygynous, polygamous, omnivorous, they multiply by budding, and they fragment. And that right there is a nightmare. So let's talk about one at a time. What is unicolonial? Well, unicolonial means that they will live among multiple nests. They live in proximity to each other. And these nests, think of it as, this is the best I can do to illustrate. It's a hub network, a computer hub network, but it kind of explains it. You got here, see where my little white circle is? All right, you have one here, and this is what is known as a bud nest over here, and another bud nest, and another bud nest, and another bud nest. And let's call these black ones nests that have been fragmented and abandoned, okay? So these ants, these are called, let's call these nests that have been abandoned. And everything else is a hub nest, okay? So they share everything, okay? They will share the eggs. They will share the queens. They will share the workers. They will share the food. They will share the larvae. They will just share everything. And this is why they're so successful at breeding and reproducing and being so difficult to control. Let me give you an example of polygyny. Polygyny, they will have multiple queens in the nest. To give you an example, in 1 square yard of lawn, you can have in some of these ants as many as 55 queens per square yard. And in one mound, it could be a 10-to-1 ratio where you have 10 workers to 1 queen. So multiple queens means mass reproduction. Some of these guys are reproducing up to 150 eggs a day. When sugar supply is high and protein is high, these guys can reproduce anywhere they want to in mass quantities. All right. Now, polygamous ants or polygamy, they make they'll make the multiple queen, and since they make the multiple queens, they also will make these nests within proximity to each other. Very clear. You saw the network, okay? So they're making this, and this allows them to easily go back and forth really quickly. Within a matter of hours, they can relocate an entire nest within 1 to 2 hours. So the idea is, think about this for a minute. You have a kitchen, and this is the most common problem. You have a kitchen, and there's an outlet. There's a microwave oven, and there's the upper shelf, okay? And you can have a nest in the microwave oven, in the back of that oven. You can have a nest in that outlet switch, which is like 2 feet away. And then you can have a nest really close by in an upper cabinet. And what you're seeing them going back and forth between the microwave, and you're thinking they're just making a trail finding the food. No, they're going back and forth between nests because they're sharing everything. So all of a sudden, they decide they don't need one of those nests. They'll just move everything else. So the proximity is why it's so difficult, especially with ghost ant. We see this constantly with ghost ant. And we've traced ghost ant as many as 30 feet from the original nest. I mean, I traced it once from a bar that went around the corner, down a hallway, and then it went up the sliding door. And the nest was actually at the top of the sliding door. It wasn't even where the food was. They were just going to the bar to get the syrup and the stuff that's there. But the actual nest, we traced it back to over there. So that gives you an example that how far. I had another situation with ghost ant that it was from the kitchen down the hall to a bedroom closet. And the nest was actually in a bedroom closet. And we had to trace it and treat it in there because that's where it was. So give you an idea of how these guys work. Now, omnivorous. Now, I get a lot of calls and people tell me, hey, I got sugar ants. You know, if I leave anything, a bread or anything, they love sugar. Yes, they love sugar. They feed on sugar, but they're also, these guys are omnivorous. This is why they're able to survive anywhere because they can eat oils. They can eat proteins. They'll eat peanut butter. They will eat from a tuna can. They'll eat the water in tuna. Anything at all, any type of oil, fats, they can consume it. As you see here, this is a little, a yellow crazy ant, and they're hauling away and devouring at what appears to be an American cockroach. So here's another thing. You got houses with crawl spaces, right? And you got a crawl space, and underneath that crawl space is open, and you got rats going under there. You've got cats, raccoons. Guess what? Those animals carry fleas on them. Well, ghost ants have been found to take and steal the flea eggs from the fleas so that they can feed on them. These guys will feed on their own. They'll have these ants will create what are known as trophy eggs. They will give birth to eggs and they will store them and eat them in case their food is in short supply. This is why they're able to survive just anywhere. All right. So now we understand that they're omnivorous. Well, let's talk about budding. Because budding is different, and most pest control people get this confused. Budding and fragmentation are two different things. Budding is a reproductive process they use. What is that? Well, you know they can mate without going out of the nest and without flying. They can mate right in the nest, which gives them a higher chance of being reproductive. You know, if you fly away from your nest and you end up on a windshield of a car, well, you know, there goes your reproductive life. But if you're in the nest, you can be safe in there. Okay, but budding is when a queen gets out of the nest, takes about a bunch of workers with her, and goes and creates a bud. Think of it as a flower. You have all the petals around the flower. They still belong to that flower, but they're independent petals. And that's how these nests work. And then so that's what happens with budding. Now, what is fragmentation? Well, fragmentation is different. Fragmentation usually happens because of disturbance. You disturb the nest somehow. Here's the couple of ways you disturb the nest. Number one is you make the mistake of going out to your local hardware store, your big box store, home improvement store, and you will buy an over-the-counter spray, typically in an aerosol because it's easy to use. And you will spray it. What happens is you don't know that those over-the-counter sprays and a lot of people doing professional pest control are also using products that are repellent like pyrethroids. Pyrethroids by nature are repellent. And if you apply it near a nest, you could repel them and cause it to fragment and go to another nest. What happens is they don't just move to one nest. They will take their eggs, they will take the workers, the queens, and split them up and divide them. Almost like sometimes equally, 60 to 40 ratio kind of deal. It's very easy. You show up to somebody's door and you say, hey, we just got kicked out of our place. Can we move in? And they're like, no, not really. But, well, we got food. Well, all right, come in, kind of deal. Hey, you got food. Come on in. You've got resources. And they share. They're not antagonistic towards each other like a lot of other ant species. Now, they are antagonistic towards other ant species and other insects. So by, when they fragment, you slam the door, you moved out all your dishes or something because, started cleaning, you cause them to move. How far can they move? They can relocate a nest, 40 feet away completely in 24 hours, completely moved. And you will see a trail. And usually sometimes you're thinking, why are they trailing? Well, there's a pheromone trail. They're either finding food, transporting food, or they're moving that nest across. And that's why you see the trails. All right. So in conclusion, this is why these ants are so difficult to control and why so many homeowners have trouble controlling them, why PMPs, professionals, have trouble controlling them. Understanding this behavior is vital to developing your protocol, policies, procedures, and then selecting your products. People fail all the time because you'll go to the over-the-counter or they'll choose a bait and they'll use a bait product like a gel bait or they'll use these little, bait packets and they'll put it down. They're like, oh, it worked last time and now it's not working anymore. There's resistance. No, there's no resistance. You either contaminated the bait with a spray, with a pyrethroid, and they no longer want to eat it. They either changed their feeding habit or the bait went rancid. If ants fall in bait, you got to change bait out almost weekly. You got to do an inspection on bait. And if you got a liquid bait and the ants fall inside, it makes that bait rancid. They won't eat it. Second, you're using a gel bait and and the gel bait is a glucose bait and they're in protein mode. You're going to have to switch to a protein bait. There are sometimes no bait available for certain type species of ants, and then you have to use a non-repellent, crack and crevice, using insect growth regulators, using non-repellent products you can use outside, products you can use inside. There are restrictions. The problem is there are no over-the-counter products that are non-repellent at big box stores, okay? So you have to find them online, and you got to make sure they're legal in your state before you use it. So this is why if you have and you purchased a quarterly service and they're not getting control, is because you're going to need a more frequent service. Why? Products outside usually will last no more than 28 days. Any product, I don't care which one you use. The majority of products, because of the way the sunlight breaks it down, because of the soil breaking it down, because of the water breaking it down, because of the bacterial activity in the soil breaking it down, because of the alkalinity of the concrete breaking it down. You can't. So if most people buy a quarterly service because it's convenient, they don't have disruption of their life. But understand that just because you bought a quarterly service and you've got one of these ants does not mean you're going to be able to control it. So I suggest you talk to your pest control professional, have them come at least once a month and check those baits at least once a week on an initial service. And that way, you're going to be able to get the control that you need.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day. Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.